All right, so welcome everybody to our kickoff event in USI's 2015 Disability Awareness Week. This particular event is co-sponsored by a number of offices and programs. That includes the Counseling Center, the Office of Disability Resources, the Center for Social Justice Education, the Center for Service Learning, and USI's ADA Coordinator. Today's event is our student panel, Uncovering Hidden Differences. For those of you that do not know me, I'm Dr. Stephanie Cunningham. I'm the Outreach Coordinator in our Counseling Center, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon to introduce our panel and to facilitate our discussion. So, before we get into that, a few bits of business to address. Just wanted to let you all know if you need to sign in to demonstrate that you were in fact present for today's event. If you haven't done so already, there are a plethora of sign-in sheets up here for different courses and then general ones that will be available for you to sign when we're wrapped up at around 12:50. And I'm also happy to sign if you have a separate form. So I want to make sure that everybody has silenced their cell phones for the duration of our program here. As a quick reminder, there are many additional events scheduled for Disability Awareness Week 2015. Later tonight, we are hosting a guest speaker, Wade Wingler. Mr. Wingler is the director of the Assistive Technology Center and the In-Data Project at Easter Seals Crossroads in Indianapolis. He will be providing a presentation that should be very interesting as well as useful. It's called Getting the Gadget Edge, Using Technology to Stay on Top of Everything Life Throws at a College Student. So that event will be held in this same room tonight at 6 o'clock. So if you would like any additional details about Disability Awareness Week events for this year, as well as all of the other fabulous programming that we offer through the Counseling Center, please take one of the yellow outreach and programming guides that are on the table of resources and check out the resources in general as you are leaving today. So, for today's program, hosting a panel of student participants, they've all graciously agreed to speak about their experiences and lives as individuals with some sort of hidden difference. So I will introduce our panel members, and then I will begin the program by asking a few questions, and then to whatever extent we have time, we will open it up to the audience to ask questions of our panel as well. So now, introducing our panel. Teddi Rausch, did I get it? Excellent. Teddi is currently a sophomore at USI studying political science and international studies. She is originally from Winamac, Indiana. She is currently vice president of the USI College Democrats, and she interns for the Vanderburgh County Democrat Party headquarters. After graduation, she would like to volunteer for the Peace Corps. Katie Greenwell. Katie is a very recent alumna of USI. She graduated this past December. She was a double major in psychology and Spanish studies, and she is now employed as a staff member in USI's risk management department. Katie is a lifelong resident of Evansville. Third, we've got Amethyst Turner. Amethyst is in her junior year at USI, working on a double major in public relations and Spanish studies. She spent several years volunteering with organizations that advocate for people with disabilities and has received several honors for her work as a disability advocate both in and outside of the United States. She's originally from Anderson, Indiana. Our final panel participant is Mady Cochran. Mady is currently a senior at USI, and she anticipates that she will be graduating in the nearish future. Hey, Peeps joining us. Excellent. Cheer. Good stuff. She is majoring in sociology, and she's interested in working to support survivors of intimate partner violence, folks who are typically not the focus of such services, including LGBT-identified people and men. She's originally from Indianapolis. And that is our panel. All right. So, as I've mentioned, today we're going to talk about forms of disability that might not be immediately evident to other people and the kinds of experiences that go along with having that sort of disability. Current law in the United States defines disability in part as having an impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And that can include things such as seeing, hearing, sleeping, walking, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, concentrating, communicating, and working. So all of our panelists either have or have had a diagnosis of some kind that falls under that legal definition of what it means to have a disability. So, we're ready to get some questions going, friends, after I have talked for a good chunk of time. All right. So, panelists, do you consider yourself to have a disability, and why or why not?
Okay.
This is how it usually goes at the beginning.
I volunteer. I consider myself to have a disability because... Projecting. I consider to have a disability because it's something that's been in the works since I was younger, that we noticed I was in middle school. It would intervene with my learning because I would make so many noises. It would really upset teachers, and that's something that upset me because I couldn't learn because they couldn't teach, and I felt that I was disabling them with my disability. And as I've gotten older, such like in college age, I've figured out that I do have attention deficit or ADHD, and that's also contributed to my learning problems, which has also stemmed as to why I may have Tourette's. So.
Other panelists. Mady, go ahead.
Yes and no, because I recognize that with what I have going, it severely impacts my life to the point where sometimes I just can't even function. In fact, getting out of bed, I'm like, yes, I got out of bed today. But trying to explain it to others and trying to actually get, accommodations, or trying to just feel like I'm validated for times where I'm, at a real low point, it's just such a struggle. I'm lucky here at USI where they've been really accommodating, but it's not the case everywhere.
I feel the same as Mady. Like, yes and no. It is a disability in the definition sense. It affects my functioning and my relationships, but I don't like to think of myself as disabled. Especially since it's a lifelong thing that seems overwhelming, I like to just think of it as like a little bit of a setback or an obstacle that's kind of in my way right now.
Amethyst, anything to add, or are you good?
I think the only thing that I would probably add is just that for me it's difficult being a person with mild cerebral palsy, that I always feel like I fit in this middle category where technically I do have a physical disability upon definition, but because I am so high functioning, a lot of times, I live a relatively normal life and do things just like everyone else. I have a job, I go to school. So I oftentimes feel like I'm in this middle ground where I don't really fit in either category because I'm not really, don't feel like I'm disabled enough to really consider myself, needing that much help. But at the same time, a lot of times, I do oftentimes have to ask for help, and then, in a normal sense, people say, oh, well, you are disabled, you do fit in that category, so.
So now that our participants have had a chance to answer a question, how are we doing audio-wise? Do we need them to use the mic? People in the back of the room. I have terrible hearing, so I'm very sympathetic to folks that don't hear super well. So people in the back, we're good. Everybody's good. Excellent. All right. Cool. So, panelists, do you think that social stigma around disability has affected how you perceive yourself and your diagnosis? And if so, how?
Right. I guess a bit. I remember actually reading an article about people without mental illnesses being sent to a mental hospital, and even though they acted as they normally would because they weren't diagnosed with anything, they still got treated as they did have a mental illness. So things that upset them, it's like, oh, you're just crazy. And I end up doing that to myself too. Like any kind of valid emotions I have, well, that's just me, I'm crazy, so I'm clearly blowing everything out of proportion because that's just what I do. So, and I definitely know that by telling people that, I do get some looks like, hey, you know, you're crazy.
You feel like you've internalized some of that.
Okay, for me and the way I've handled the social stigma, in my case, a lot of my problems were in high school because teachers weren't very understanding. What they didn't understand about my Tourette's and my tics, I make vocal growls, cat noises, and screaming sometimes. And what they didn't understand was that it hurt me. Like, it comes up through my chest and it has this painful feeling like a chest hiccup, if you've ever had those. And those suck. And I think the stigma that people have is that she's annoying, she just wants attention. And that really reflects on me and it hurts my feelings because that's not what I want. I have nerves. This is what's going on. I can't help it. And, you know, here at USI, they've been really understanding. And in high school, I never got the ability to give my professors or teachers sheets saying, this is what's going on. I didn't have that ability. Whereas here as USI, Rhonda has been really helpful with identifying that problem. And now my professors know. Sometimes they still stare at me, and that's kind of awkward, but it's helpful.
Thank you.
I would definitely have to say that 100% that stigma is something that I have always struggled with, especially because of my disability, primarily being physical. You know, when I get up in the morning, you know, every morning and I look in the mirror, it's sometimes hard for me not to get caught up in what's on the outside and what I, you know, wish I could change. And, you know, I'm actually working on a project right now as a communications major about the different stigmas in media in regards to people with disabilities and how that has evolved and changed over the years. But I definitely find myself, you know, multiple times a day, you know, having to remind myself that, you know, I am good enough and that it's okay that, you know, that I am different and that I have different challenges, and those challenges don't define me who I am as a person.
So it sounds like you still struggle with that quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think it's hard not to internalize what people think about whatever you have, regardless of what your disability is. The way people view you, what they say about you, whether you hear it in the media or something somebody whispers about you, or even if it's something your friends joke about you sometimes. Because like with depression or anxiety, people just think, a lot of people don't even think it's real, and they think it's just a mood you're having or that you're lazy, you know, but it's not. Like, you can't function, you know, you can't, like she said, you can't get out of bed, you know, it makes you really slow, you know, you're trying to go fast for your friends, you know, so you can go the same speed as them, but it just doesn't work. Like, me being here is an accomplishment. To talk to you is really hard, but people just don't understand that sometimes. It's really frustrating.
So it sounds like stigma has been an issue, at least to some extent, for all four of you. Which is part of why we are particularly grateful that you are willing to talk about that, because it's not an easy subject to discuss. Thank you for sharing those experiences. So my next question is, do you think your gender or other aspects of your identity affected your willingness to seek support and treatment for your diagnosis? And if so, how?
I definitely think it does, because I think women don't have as much of a problem seeking out for treatment. They think it's okay, whereas men feel that it makes them weak and are worried about how people are going to see them or what their friends and family are going to think because of what society has kind of made them. And being a psychology major, it was also much easier for me too, because counseling is kind of part of that. So I know how it works, and I know it's a good thing.
So you feel like it was pretty easy for you to seek help?
It was, but it wasn't, because I didn't know what to say, and I had a friend that kind of pushed me. Like, I wanted to do it, but it was hard to get me in there. But I knew that it would be a good thing. Whereas other people sometimes don't think that help is a good thing or something that they should do.
In seeking help, I've had some people who've been really amazing, but then others who have not been so amazing. I remember it's a lot for me to open up to someone even in counseling, even though I know it's a safe space, just because you have that degree and that license doesn't mean that your views and your opinions are necessarily ones that are going to be helpful. I remember in disclosing my sexuality, I was told that I was going to go to hell unless I changed by a licensed therapist. I remember also saying that if I grew out my hair and wore women's clothing, that I would magically not be gay. So, I mean, it's those things where I know that, it's supposed to be a safe place, but what can I actually disclose? And, then it just goes back to it making me feel like that internalized stuff that, since I, don't like men, it goes back to I'm crazy. So.
Sounds like those experiences exacerbated some of the difficulty that you're already having. Yeah. I'm sorry that you had that experience.
So everyone knows if you grow out your hair and wear a dress, you're automatically straight.
Teddi, Amethyst, do either of you want to?
Yeah. With me, my parents, my mom especially, was really supportive of finding out what was going on. I went through multiple EKG tests and people thinking I was just lying about it, where I was really nervous to talk to my original neurologist, but he was extremely helpful in finding out what was going on, because there are multiple health issues I do have, and we were trying to figure out what aided to what was going on at that point in time. But I did used to take medicine for it. However, I found that the medicine, not really hindering, but it didn't do much, and I would rather embrace making a cat noise or a growl or a scream at someone than having to feel suppressed by a medicine. It is a fact that men are 3 times more likely to have Tourette's more than women, and I feel that, there's a stigma of men not needing help, wanting to be more prideful about it. However, there is a young man I do know in Sigma Pi that we've related on that he makes noises as well. And an example, we were at the movies on Saturday for The Hobbit, and I kept making noises. I was excited. I loved the movie, and he would stifle his because he didn't think that he needed to be as loud. But as soon as we got out, I heard him screech as loud as possible. But I feel like my influence of me not wanting to suppress how I feel or suppress the noises I make is influencing towards him, because he felt better about making the noises, if that makes sense. So I would rather use what I have as a support system for someone else, because you shouldn't have to shame who you are or feel inferior to go get help or look to someone else.
It sounds like having had really pretty positive early medical experience to set you up to be in a good place later on. So, panelists, how have others responded when you've tried to describe or explain your disability-related symptoms and the effect they have or have had on your functioning?
I feel like when I've tried to tell people, they just kind of think I'm being overdramatic or making it up. They kind of roll their eyes, brush it off, not listen, and turn away, because it's not, they don't think it's something serious, like where you have like a real mental handicap, like Down syndrome or something that you hear about all the time. And that's kind of frustrating, because then that kind of makes a snowball effect where it just makes me feel worse about myself.
People have been very dismissive, it sounds like.
Yeah, and then sometimes it makes them look down upon me a little bit more.
Which creates a spiral
Right.
of not so great feelings, and
Right.
certainly don't help with depression.
Right.
Yeah.
When it comes to that, I usually get one of two responses. I usually either get a pretty dismissive response, or I get a pretty, I guess you could say, positive response, and someone trying to say that, like, I'm their hero, they admire me for, everything that, I go through. But at the same time, I think, for me, either one of those responses is quite a struggle, because I don't really want to be looked at as someone that, I'm your hero because I, have cerebral palsy, or, it's such a great thing because I did fill in the blank because I have cerebral palsy. I want people to look at me and say, hey, good job for doing this, because you've worked hard, and you are who you are. And I want people to look at me and see Amethyst and not see those challenges. And I think too, when I try to go to people and try to explain my challenges, because I oftentimes don't talk about them, and I don't necessarily always make them known, especially, with things like when it comes to like sleep issues and like chronic pain and things like that. I think it's hard for people to understand because they see me walking around and they see me have a smile on my face, but that doesn't mean that those challenges aren't there and they don't, exist. And I think because a lot of people can't put themselves in those shoes, that they have a hard time, seeing that, okay, this is really a part of her life, and she's not just, brushing me off because she doesn't want to go see this movie, but it's because I really, I'm in too much pain today, or I don't have enough energy today to do what I need to do.
It's really interesting that even when people presumably think that they're being positive by telling you, like, boy, that's so great, you were able to do those things, that being somebody else's inspirational poster is not really what you were looking for. Like,
Not at all.
and presumably those folks think that they're offering you this great compliment when they say that. They don't appreciate ways in which that could be really hurtful. Other folks, anything?
I don't mind. When it comes to explaining things to people as how I function, I can really say that I think a lot of my sorority sisters, not to highlight Greek life, but they've been very accepting as to why I make noises. I mean, the normal question is, do you cuss? Because a huge stereotype of Tourette's is they cuss, they move a lot, they're OCD about how many things of tissue paper they use. However, mine is different for me because I do make noises, but I don't cuss. I just scare people a lot of the time. But I mean, when it does come to functioning, like I said, it does hurt, and it's not something I can really control. And if I were to suppress it, the noise, it's even worse. I feel an entire chest pain, and it'll stay for a minute or two, and that's not enjoyable. But I feel like that happening in class, it's just annoying. I'm taking a test, I continually make noises, I'm distracting myself. And I mean, I do take Adderall to help with my ADHD, and sometimes neurologists think that it makes it worse, but in my case, it helps me calm down, it helps me focus. So I feel like when I do discuss with people how I function and they question why I use such medicine, it gets a little difficult, but in the end, I feel like I've researched my own issues enough that I make sense to other people.
I think you feel pretty empowered in knowing what works best for you. Mady, were you going to add something?
I was just thinking, explaining like the symptoms when you're feeling down, or maybe you're in pain or something, seems a little easier, at least to me, than when you're actually doing well, because then people are like, oh, you're doing this thing, we're so proud of you, you're getting over it. But at least for me, where it's been such a lifelong thing, it doesn't go away. And just because in this moment I'm doing fine doesn't mean that in the overall thing that I'm fixed or something. One big thing, I like to go to conventions and stuff, but those are so draining because there's just so many people, and I just feel so just drained out of everything. so I usually just go away and be by myself for a while, but trying to explain that to like my mom, who's really familiar with my symptoms and everything, it's like, how can you do that? But then something like this, I'll have a panic attack over, versus, you know, being with thousands of people. And it's just one of those things where, you know, there's a lot of, you know, preparations that go into things. There's, you know, just knowing how to get away, but it's managing even the good times and knowing that just because in this moment I'm fine, it doesn't mean that overall I'm fixed, I'm cured, or any number of those things.
And you get that impression that's what other people want or expect from you, is to be cured. Kind of as a follow-up to that, do you think other people would respond to you differently if you had a more visible or apparent disability? It was something where they immediately looked at you and said, that is a person with a disability. Do you think they would respond differently?
From experience, I do know that people have responded differently. As a young child with cerebral palsy, my symptoms were a lot more apparent than they are now. And when I was young, went back and forth between walkers and braces up to my knees and in and out of wheelchairs and in casts and things that made it very, very apparent in my physical issues. And I think now that people can't necessarily see, and I've had surgeries that, you know, have made me high functioning and able to walk and do those things, it is so much more difficult for me in a lot of ways, because I have to remind myself, you know, that people can't see anymore. People don't, it's not so obvious like it was before, and I feel like a lot of times now I have to explain myself more than I used to, especially because dealing with cerebral palsy and being this high functioning, a lot of people don't, when I walk into a room, they don't believe me that, you know, I have this disability. And I know that I've had professors tell me, you know, hey, I, you know, knew that I was going to have, you know, a student with a disability in my class, but, you know, I was expecting somebody in a wheelchair to wheel through here, and somebody that was, you know, a lot less functioning than you are. And especially if, you know, I tell them, you know, my diagnosis, a lot of them kind of take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, like the person that I know that has, you know, cerebral palsy is nowhere near as functioning as you. So yeah, I think it does change once, you know, they cannot see apparently on the outside what's exactly going on with you.
So not only disbelieving you and your experience, but also negating that part of who you are. Mm-hmm. So it's a twofer.
Well, okay. When I was younger, my symptoms were a little bit more different. I used to twitch a lot. I used to do a lot of neck movement, a lot of like hitting down. And when I would sleep with my mom sometimes, because not gonna lie, I used to, who cares? But my stepdad would be gone a lot, and our house was huge, and I felt alone. But she would notice that I would hit in my sleep. Like, I physically gave bruises to my own mom in my sleep. So if someone were to look at me and saw me hitting things still twitching as I made noises, I feel like it would be a lot worse in my case, because they would say, why can't you stop? Can you please stop that? That's annoying me. And for me, that would be extremely negative, because, like, for everyone, we can't stop what we're doing. It's not something that can be stopped now or improved, or it should be gone now. In the case of Tourette, sometimes it does go away, but for me, it's still progressing. Not necessarily progressing, but it's still happening, and I still notice it. So that's my issue.
I do think people would treat you different, because I think I've already said this, but, you know, you see people treat people with like a physical disability, you know, kind of like what she said, that you can see a little nicer. And then if, you know, you say that you have a mental disability, they kind of treat you like crazy. And I think that they would be a lot more sympathetic guess if it were something that I could see.
A little bit more understanding.
Right. And how it impaired you.
I think that it'd just be different, not necessarily better. Like, yeah, you would, it's like, hey, I'm clearly disabled, but, people treating you nicer, I'm not entirely sure if that'd be necessarily the case. It's more like pity, and I have to be nice to you because you're different, and it's more that kind of thing where you're not even necessarily even sometimes considered a person. Because I know I was talking to one of my friends who sometimes has to use her wheelchair, and she said that people don't even really treat her like a person, that they'll like look at her, then actively avoid her, won't even acknowledge her. It's like, what's the point? If I'm not really even a person, I might as well just become a robot. So I'm not entirely sure if it necessarily I don't think it'd be better by any case other than, hey, look, you can tell I actually am disabled.
You have less of that pressure to feel like you have to prove it somehow. You're like, I'm in a wheelchair. Like, how much more proof do you need versus explaining to people about your symptom? So, do you think your gender or any other aspects of your identity have affected how other people perceive you and how authentic your symptoms and your experience are?
I think with depression and anxiety, like, it's more common for women to have it than it is for men. But I think if, like, a guy were to say that they had it, people would be more like, oh, okay, oh, that's sad, you have depression and anxiety for you. But with women, I think they're just kind of like, oh, you're hormonal and moody, and that's just part of it, which kind of sucks because that's not always necessarily what it is. So
it's just part of being female?
I think that's what some people think it is.
Mm-hmm. So you're complaining about something that all the ladies experience.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Well, like I had said, men experience this 3 times more than women do. However, I don't see being a female like negates to any other issues. I feel like, but this is just my opinion, that Tourette's is like an even, open playing field, whereas you see anyone or everyone having it. Like I said, the other young man, I wouldn't have known he had it until he had said something, or unless I heard something. So I feel, for me, I don't find gender as a significant case or issue. But that's just my experience.
It hasn't seemed like that's made people treat your symptoms any more or less seriously.
I mean, the people that I interact with, because he's normally in my group where I go and talk to, they don't treat us any differently. We're equals in that sense.
Speaking about a different identity, I guess in some ways whenever I talk to someone about it, it's like, oh, of course, you're sad and, maybe sometimes suicidal. It's because you're gay, that's just something, because it's the, rates for depression, suicide, and everything related to that are so much higher in the LGBT community. But it's always one of those things, well, you're going the wrong way. It's not because I'm gay, it's because of the way society treats, the LGBT community. So it's mixing up the causal effects of that, but it's just, oh, of course you feel that way, you're gay. No thanks.
So kind of similar to what Katie was saying, like, oh, it's part of your identity, of course, that goes along with that. Like, why are you even complaining about it?
Everyone deals with it. You're not special.
Mm-hmm. Anything else for that one? So do you feel like you've experienced discrimination related to your disability? And if so, can you remember a time, an example that you would be willing to share to kind of illustrate that for us?
Well, I feel like I'm talking so much, and I don't mean to seem selfish, because I really appreciate everyone else's, I love listening to Mady talk, which makes me happy. But when I was in middle school, and I didn't figure things out or go to a doctor until 7th grade, and then I entered 8th grade. I already hated math, B, the teacher was a very ignorant male. And one day, my mom was gone in Arizona dealing with my stepdad's business, and I don't even know why he was being so mean, but he had told the class to quiet down, and this was an often occurrence where everyone would get quiet. I'd get kind of excited and just make a noise. Well, I'd screeched, and he looks at me, he says, "Miss Rausch, that's unnecessary." I just look at him, I said, I just turned in all of my medical paper, why are you treating me like this? And so in that case, he was a teacher who had a history of discriminating against even Mexican young women. So why would I want to deal with that? And I went to homeschooling for a few months. My mom couldn't stand me at home, so she sent me back to school. And I had to deal with that teacher. And he said, you're doing great. I said, don't talk to me. I don't want to speak with you. And then my English teacher had used me being gone against me because we had a total assignment sheet and we had to record each grade we got. And I didn't get every grade because I wasn't there. And she goes, if you could have been here, you could have done that. You could have gotten all the points for it. So after that, I kind of used what I had as an agenda in a sense that I'm not going to stand down. I will scream in your face if you want me to, if you're going to treat me like that. Because no one should have to feel less than what they are. I'm sorry I have a noise. How does that bother you? That shouldn't be a problem. You should be accepting of all your students. If you're going to be a teacher, like I know Kristen's going to be, she loves everyone, and she's not going to discriminate her students for being different, for being black, for making noises, for being a girl from a low impoverished home. That's not how the education system should be, and that was my experience with being discriminated against. And since that, in high school, I've told every teacher, I've sat down with them, this is what's going on. And throughout my senior year of pre-calculus, every time I made a noise, my teacher goes, can you tell me more about that, rather than trying to single me out. She wanted to know so she could continuously know how to deal with that as she's teaching. And that's a teacher, those are the kind of teachers we need. So my discrimination has really fired my inspiration for being political. As you can tell, I really care about the education system. So
thank you for sharing.
I've definitely experienced discrimination in several different ways and in many different levels. And I think, honestly, it's something that I face every single day. But, probably the biggest challenge that has frustrated me the most was when I would go in for job interviews. And I would go in to have a job interview, and I always try to make it to where it's not apparent that I have a disability whatsoever. I try to do my best to make sure that day that I'm not walking with a brace, I'm not walking with my cane, I'm not going in and disclosing that in any way, shape, or form. And oftentimes, I refuse to tell an employer that I am actually disabled until they tell me that I am hired. Because I've had situations where I would go in for an interview and they would tell me that they were interested in giving me the position, and then they would ask me if I had any questions about anything in regards to the job or my responsibilities or anything that I might have to do. And I know that a couple years ago, I was offered a position at a camp for kids to be a camp counselor. And they were ready to hand me that position, and I worked at several other camps and had a lot of experience before, but as soon as they figured out that I had physical challenges and I was asking them questions about some of the specific things that they would require me to do, they immediately said, "I'm sorry, but we don't think that you are physically able to carry out the responsibilities that we have set for you. So we're not going to offer you this position." And I've had that happen in several instances. I've also been discriminated against, believe it or not, with other people who have disabilities. I know that I had a professor who had a physical disability herself, and I went to talk to her one afternoon in her office about a couple of things that I was struggling with in her class. And I remember her sitting there and telling me that I had no excuses, that there was no reason as to why I should be, I should have to ask for extra help, that I should have to come to her, and she was basically telling me things like, well, with my disability, this is how it has been for me, and I didn't have to use those things, so you shouldn't either. I made it through school, I got a doctorate degree, I'm a professor, and look at me, when those challenges that she faced were nothing like I faced on a day-to-day basis. And so I think I'm constantly discriminated against in other people's opinions because oftentimes I feel like they don't take the time to understand what I'm saying, and they don't really want to listen to what I have to say because they get these preconceived notions in their head, and then they think that that's how things are, and getting those out of their head is extremely difficult.
So those stories that you shared, it sounds like the two ends of the spectrum, like completely presuming that you can't do anything, or presuming that you should be able to do everything. Your ability status shouldn't affect anything about your functioning. Thank you for sharing. All right, y'all, we have a few minutes left in our time together today, so we're going to open it up now for you all. What questions do you have for our panelists? Who's the brave soul that's going to go first? Because once that first person does, then it's just like the floodgates are open. But go for it.
Just kind of curious, where are y'all majoring?
I'm a sociology major, and I'm hoping to go and get my master's in social work or mental health counseling, something like that. Haven't quite decided.
I'm a double major in public relations and Spanish studies.
I already graduated, and I just graduated last semester, and I got psychology and Spanish studies.
I'm a double major in international studies and political science.
Was there somebody over here that was starting? I'm sorry.
No, can we ask a question?
Did you want to ask?
No, I do have a question. I want to say thank you first because I just think anytime we've got the opportunity to listen wholeheartedly to anybody who has a different life experience than we do personally, it's just it just widens our perspective. And thank you so much for that because you think differently about some things today. So thank you. My first question is, so you guys touched a little bit about the difference between high school and college as far as your experiences. Do you guys have any opinions? And I don't know if you've officially went through an IEP process, any of you, but do you have opinions about how that last part of high school could potentially be changed to transition more easily to college? I like how they do it in college. It seems like you've got a lot of responsibility as far as interacting with the professors on anything that would have to participate or have competitions. Those are really long questions.
So transition from high school to college.
Well, I mean, I know I touched base on middle school, high school, and college, and I feel it would be I feel there needs to be a transition just between secondary school, just between middle school and high school, because there was a big difference going from middle school where they were extremely ignorant, and then going up to the high school level where they actually had to address different problems. I mean, there was a classroom where there was IEP students. However, I didn't fit into that category because I'm pretty high functioning. I did all right in high school, but I feel like there needs to be even just a presentation for all the teachers, because I know there were even teachers in my high school where they had children who had IEP plans and issues. And I feel like if teachers were just addressed and they could understand how to help the student rather than just diminishing their ability to be a student. I feel like that would just be even more helpful even if the teacher could just talk to the student, hey, this is what's going on, let's go from here. Because my transition into college was great. I was extremely excited that, Rhonda and her office were so nice and so helpful, and she sat down with me and said, what do we need to put on these notes? What do you want your professors to know about you? What does the campus need to know? And I don't think I'd ever felt so accepted in an environment. And if teachers in high school could just relate to that and maybe even talk to college disability offices, I feel they would have a better take on how to deal with it and how to help students transition into college. Because, like I said, I was extremely excited that someone wanted to help me instead of put me in a corner.
And I agree. I've practiced a little bit in the high school setting, and just coming to the college setting where it seems like in our process you're treated as an individual. And like you said, Rhonda talks to you about, just individually, hey, what's going on, instead of here's a whole blanket thing. So I just think it seems like they have to do that. You guys have any thoughts on that?
I think too, with the tradition, like the transition from like the high school setting to the college setting, there needs to be, I think, more in a lot of cases where students sometimes don't know how to advocate for themselves. They don't know how to say, what they need and, why they need it. And, for me, like when I was in high school, I had a resource coordinator that was very good about not only getting, what I needed, but she taught me how to advocate for myself. And she taught me, how to seek out those resources and where to find them and, how to get them. So by the time I got to the college setting, I had already spent 4 years advocating for myself. So when I got to the college setting and they said, okay, you need to go to your professors with this letter and you need to explain to them, how they can help you and what you need, it was really, really easy for me because I had already been doing it this entire time, through high school, and I think even partway through middle school. And I think that's what a lot of, students struggle with sometimes, is knowing where to start and what to say. And I think if a lot more, high schools were on board with that and not just necessarily doing things for students, but teaching them how to be their own advocates, it would make it a lot smoother transition.
I am loath to cut off our conversation because I think we could probably keep going for quite a while longer, but I also want to be respectful of everyone's time who was so gracious to join us this afternoon. So it is time to wrap things up. Thank you all for being here, and can we have a hand for our panelists?